Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to America's Energy Future, Emerging Technology and Job Creation, brought to you by the Greater Houston Partnership.
Interesting. Thanks very much. So, Will, I want to turn to you now, and I want to bring up biofuels. Sort of for better or worse. I mean, there's the sense that we've got to do something to lessen our dependence on foreign oil. This is, old news. Maybe biofuels is the answer. But then there's kind of a dark side to biofuels, depending on who you ask. Is it food versus fuel? And can you give us your sort of thought process around where we stand with biofuels and what the future looks like for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to answer that question in two parts. The first part has to deal with oil and gas. Why are we dealing with biofuels in the first place? And in January 2007, George Bush came out and said, America is addicted to foreign oil. Who would have imagined that George Bush would have said that? That's a big deal. And so in 2006, I wrote a book called Biodiesel 2020. Last year, I wrote a book called Algae 2020, and I've been on book tours. Whenever I give a presentation to an audience, I say, in the world of biofuels, there is an abundance of opinion, but there's a shortage of facts. And my name is Will Thurmond, and I'm here to report the facts. So with help from people like Walter from the Houston Technology Center, where I'm an advisor, and with Lane Sloan, where I work with the Greater Houston Partnership's BioFuels Task Force, we're working on what can we do with biofuels to move things forward. So I'd like to just roll off a few facts and talk about oil as a challenge and biofuels as one solution. We have a lot of organizations up here talking about electric, maybe for cars, but we still need liquid transportation fuels. So the first thing is the U.S. imports more than 65% of its crude oil. Of that 35% that remains here domestically, we produce about a third of that in the Gulf area. So that impacts our jobs locally. We used to have the seven sisters of oil, Exxon, Shell, Mobil, British Petroleum, and they had a command over the large portion of oil and gas in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Well, now we have a new seven sisters, and they are national oil companies: Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Iran, Iraq, Russia, Nigeria, and Brazil. And the new seven sisters are mostly national oil companies. And 80% of the proven oil reserves in the world are in the hands of those companies. It's out of our control. So what do we do about that as the U.S.? How do we address those challenges? That's something I work on with Walter and with Lane and with other people here at the National Algae Association here in the U.S. Another big problem is China this year became the largest consumer of energy in the world. And last year, China became the largest emitter of carbon dioxide emissions in the world. And how do we compete with China and India in the emerging markets for what's left of the cheap oil that's out there? And how will the U.S. compete in this world now that 80% of the world's oil reserves are out of the hands of oil companies? So we'll start there. And biofuels is just one answer. We have natural gas for electric cars. We can use other forms for alternative transportation, nuclear, wind. We can use biomass for electric power. So biofuels for liquid transport is critically important to the aviation industry, to the national security industry, for the DoD, for DARPA, for our American Strike Force. And if you look at diesel and distillates, including jet fuel, that represents about 60 billion gallons per year of fuel. And that's mostly for the industrial and military markets. So biofuels, we really have two answers. Today the answer is coal and sugar for ethanol. Now corn and sugar. Now corn isn't going to last very long in the U.S. The U.S. used to consume about 140 billion gallons a year of gasoline. Well, we now have just about 12 billion gallons of ethanol coming from corn. So that's displacing 10% of our total fuel supply. So when we hear George Bush saying America is addicted to foreign oil, what are we going to do to get off foreign oil? Well, we're already 10% there, and that comes from corn. But we have to use 1/3 of our entire corn supply to get there. And that's too much. Brazil is doing a nice job with sugar cane, but that's another country and another story. The good story behind ethanol is it's cheap to make. Last year, Valero actually made more profits on ethanol than they did on refining gasoline. So from an oil and gas perspective, ethanol is not always a bad thing. But the amount of ethanol we can produce is limited in the U.S. We cannot grow enough corn for ethanol. We cannot grow enough soybeans for biodiesel. So what do? Well, the biofuels answer for tomorrow comes from things like algae and non-food-based feedstocks, switchgrass, miscanthus, municipal solid waste. There's no way we're going to be able to grow enough corn and soybeans to get us off foreign oil. The U.S. Department of Energy has noted that if we take an area the size of Maryland in the desert and we grow algae, we can replace 100% of all of our petroleum fuels in the U.S. Now, I don't know if I believe them or not, but I've been examining them. I've been out to about 45 different algae sites around the world, and I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And in the future, I think algae will be a dominant part of the energy landscape. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing ExxonMobil invest $600 million into an algae company, and while we see Chevron, Valero, Marathon, British Petroleum, Shell, and Statoil, they're all investing algae as the fuel of the future. When you compare algae to soybeans, that can produce 50 gallons per acre, to corn, which can produce 500 gallons per acre, algae can produce 5,000 gallons per acre. So that's a big deal, and that's why we're seeing the oil and gas majors invest in algae. So we have corn and sugar ethanol today, and we're going to have algae and non-food crops in the future. And that's something I'm working with the Greater Houston Partnership's Biofuels Task Force, and also with the Houston Technology Center and its algae clients, Sun Eco Energy and also Sunrise Ridge Energy, to see what we can do to get them from the pilot stage up to the next level.
Interesting.
And our Greater Houston Partnership Biofuels Task Force does have a booth outside. So if you're interested in learning more about how can we put Houston on the map as the biofuels capital of the world, please go outside and say hello to Roman Wolf and Norm Whitten. They're trying to put Houston on the map as not only the energy capital of the world. The GHP has done a great job of making Texas the #1 in the world for wind energy. We're #2 in the U.S. for solar. In 2006, biodiesel, Texas was the #1 biodiesel producing state. And whenever I'm outside of Texas, I tell people that when you think about renewable energy, don't mess with Texas. We're #1 almost across the board, and we want to be #1 as the biofuels capital of the world.
Good. Good. We like that. Follow-on question about investing in the down cycle. And by the way, it's hard for me to believe that $80 oil is at the bottom of the cycle when you think about it, because just 10 years ago we were saying if the price of oil ever gets to 40, there'd be demand destruction. It's going to change everything. But we're at the bottom of the cycle. So is there a noticeable change in terms of people's enthusiasm and investment capital and talent coming into the arena in terms of biofuels at the bottom of the cycle? Is it one of these things that thrives when oil's at 150 and doesn't thrive when oil's at 80?
Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Just in terms of the level of excitement and enthusiasm and investment capital that comes into biofuels whenever oil is so inexpensive.
Well, diesel's cheap right now, and gasoline is cheap. So and natural gas is cheap. So the renewable energy sector, we look at those cheap prices and we wonder, how can we compete? How can we make this economically affordable? And we hear a lot about environmental sustainability. But until we can make these enterprises economically sustainable, and until these enterprises can turn a dollar, they're not going to make a difference. So we have to find a way to get the cost down. And that's what I work on with the GHP, with Houston Technology Center, with the National Algae Association. How do we get the cost down for these next generation biofuels, beyond corn, beyond soybeans? And that's the key challenge. And Winston Churchill once said that the pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, and the optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. And I see this challenge as an opportunity, and that's what I'm working on.
Interesting. Very interesting. Interesting. So, Will, while I got you, so let's go back to biofuels. Tell us about the job creation opportunities in biofuels, and if you could link that to this mandate, which I don't exactly know I understand how that works, where the government says something like 36 billion gallons has got to come from biofuel.
Okay.
How does that work, and what does that mean in terms of job creation?
All right, we started off with a renewable fuel standard back in 2005, and that was just 7.5 billion gallons. And by the end of 2007, we came up with 36 billion gallons. And of that, it gets split between 15 billion gallons for corn and 21 billion gallons, which used to be called cellulosic ethanol. Well, that's changed. The important part about it is that 15 billion of the 36 billion gallons, and this all happened under the Bush administration, was for corn, and it stops there. We said that's as much cornstarch as we're going to use, and that's it. So we're getting pretty close right now at about 12 billion gallons. So the rest of it, which is the advanced biofuels, used to be called cellulosic ethanol, then they changed it to cellulosic biofuels, and now they call it advanced biofuels, which is a lot of different things. And so how do we get there? What do we do? Well, we know that we're not going to be able to replace 130 billion gallons of our consumption with ethanol, of gasoline with ethanol. That's just not going to work. We're not going to be able to get there with soy to replace 60 billion gallons of diesel fuel. So the answer is we need to use alternative sources of feedstocks, alternative methods of technologies besides just brewing hooch for alcohol, and using soybeans for biodiesel. There are a lot of very advanced techniques that are out there. And algae is one answer. As I said before, it's 100 times more productive than soybeans. So that's one of the reasons why the military, Chevron, Exxon, Statoil, we're going to hear from them in the next speech. Statoil is investing in seaweed, macroalgae, as one solution. DuPont is investing in seaweed as one solution to produce biobutanol as a drop-in fuel that will work in our existing ethanol pipelines, so we don't have to worry about compatibility problems. So I think in the future we're going to see algae as one dominant part of the energy landscape. And this is one of the reasons why I wrote a book called Algae 2020, and why I continue to assist the Greater Houston Partnerships, BioFuels Task Force, the National Algae Association, and the Houston Technology Center here in town. So I think it's critically important for us to understand how do we get to that 21 billion gallons.